Hi, I'm Elliot Theodor. I am a non-binary transgender man. And for Transgender Day of Visibility, I will be giving an informative chat about biological sex, how we define it, and what does it mean to medically transition. So, I am a licensed physical therapist with a master's in sports rehabilitation. I was born in Israel as a girl. And in December 2018, I migrated to Barcelona. One of the reasons for me moving here was so that I could peacefully transition from female to male. There is a digital exposition which accompanies this lecture, made by a very talented photographer named Valen Becker, which I hope you all have a chance to see. So this talk is about biological sex, what we think it is, what it actually is, and how those tend to be two different things. I'll explain a few terms like what it means to be transgender, cisgender, intersex, non-binary. After that, we'll go into what it means to medically transition from one gender to another, physiologically speaking. What are non-binary gender identities, and do non-binary bodies also exist? To conclude, I hope that we can reevaluate the concept of biological sex that we start out with and look how well do these definitions serve us. After that, hopefully, we'll have time for some questions. Now, this is a very short, very general talk about what most people believe about biology. If you don't share these beliefs that I'm talking about, then I'm not talking about you, and that's it, and that's okay. So many people believe that, biologically speaking, transgender people are still the sex they were assigned at birth. That would mean that I would be female. Even if they transition medically, which means take hormones or have surgeries or other interventions. Secondly, that biologically, non-binary does not exist. And everyone is either completely male or completely female. Now, both of these statements are actually false. Let's see why. So first we need to figure out like what is biological sex, right? Contrary to popular belief, biological sex doesn't have a single clear-cut definition. It is rather defined differently for different purposes. Universal definition is the one used to determine the sex of all organisms we currently know to reproduce sexually. Counterintuitively, it only defines female as an organism capable of producing large gametes, like eggs, and male as an organism capable of producing small gametes, such as sperm, right? So eggs versus sperm. Now, this definition is mostly used by biologists in their professional discussions, and most people don't even know it, let alone use it. It is counterintuitive to us because according to this logic, people who are incapable of producing eggs or sperm shouldn't have a sex. That's one thing. And the second thing is that we usually determine sex by sight, and we can't see whether someone produces an egg or a sperm. And also there's a lot of things that go with producing eggs or sperm that we intuitively include that are not included in this. So the commonly used definition. So in humans, there's actually a few definitions. Now, the most commonly known and used one includes 5 categories. So primary sex characteristics, which are interior and exterior genital structure present in birth. So that would be vagina, ovaries, penis, and testes. Now, gonadal sex, that's a weird word. It just means the presence of ovarian or testicular tissue, which produces exosperm, right? So does your junk make little spermies or does your junk make little eggies? Endocrinological sex, which means what sex hormones are prevalent in the body. So that would be mainly estrogens versus testosterones, okay? Secondary sex characteristics. This is what develops during puberty according to the sex hormones that are produced by the gonads. So that's the more visible stuff. Think of everything that happens through puberty: body hair, muscle mass changes, fat redistribution, breasts grow or don't grow, height, hip versus shoulder ratio, facial bone structure changes, sweat gland activation, and more. And the last one is chromosomal sex, or the genetic makeup. Typically, XX in females and XY in males. So doctors assign biological sex by looking at a baby's exterior genitals. They don't actually determine it by other means if the genitals appear normal. All right, so what is gender? So the World Health Organization definition for gender says that gender refers to the characteristics of men, women, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl, or boy, as well as relationships with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. All right. So the way I put it is gender identity is an individual's gender as they know it to be. And it doesn't have anything to do with their physical body or what sex they were assigned at birth. Okay. Now let's go over some definitions. So first of all, cisgender is when your gender, man or woman, right? We're not gonna pretend that anybody is actually, okay. We're going to put aside non-binary gender identities for a split second, and we're just going to like simplify it to male and female, and then we're going to come back and talk about non-binary identities. Okay, so cisgender is when your gender, what you know to be your gender, so woman or man, coincides with the sex you were assigned at birth, so female or male. Now, transgender is when your gender, so woman or man, for the moment, does not coincide with the sex you were assigned at birth, so female or male. Example, I was assigned female at birth, but my gender is not woman. Not all transgender people transition medically or socially. And it's not the act of transitioning that makes you transgender. So transgender isn't a person who transitioned or will transition. Transgender is a person with a gender identity that does not match the gender identity, like the sex they were assigned at birth. Now, intersex are people whose bodies are not exclusively male or female at birth. There are many intersex conditions that result in different combinations of physical male and female traits, including even mosaic chromosomes, where some cells are XX and some cells are XY. So some conditions are so apparent that doctors cannot even clearly assign a sex at birth. Others are so unapparent that a person might never know they have intersex anatomy. Intersex is a spectrum, and even doctors don't really agree on a single definition for it. Intersex people can be cisgender, transgender, or non-binary, according to how they feel towards the gender they were, towards the sex they were assigned at birth. Okay, so non-binary is when your gender isn't exclusively woman or man. Example, you're a bit of both, you're somewhere in the middle, you're sometimes this and sometimes that, you're neither, etc. Now, the meaning can vary from individual to individual. Example, I see myself as historically non-binary because I don't feel like I actually always was a boy. I see myself as sexually non-binary because I don't feel like a boy or a girl sexually. Now, if anyone treats me as a boy or as a girl in bed, it turns me off and I can't be with them sexually. Now, this is my personal definition. It doesn't mean that any other non-binary person will define themselves that way. Now, a non-binary person might also consider themselves transgender or not. They might choose to transition to the extent of their liking, medically or socially, or not. An androgynous appearance doesn't make a person non-binary, and a non-binary person doesn't necessarily strive to look androgynous. So medical transition includes all the physical intervention that a person might undergo or to change sexual aspects of their body away from the sex that they were assigned at birth. So primary sex characteristics. This is where stuff gets really interesting. You might want to, like, if you were like not really listening up to now, this is the good stuff. Okay, so it is surgically possible to make a vagina and a labia into a penis and scrotum, and vice versa. And it's possible to remove the uterus. Now, gonadal sex. So functioning testes and ovaries can be surgically removed, but not implanted. All right. Endocrinological sex, HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. So testosterone can be blocked or externally administered. Feminizing hormones, mainly estrogens and progesterones, can be externally administered. This affects skin and sweat glands, breasts and clitoral or penile size and function, hair growth, hair loss, fat distribution, muscle mass, fertility, vocal cords, and many, 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 many other things. Now, these things are called secondary sex characteristics. They are mostly changed by HRT, and some are changed by surgery. Voice pitch, breasts, facial bone structure, and hairline can be feminized or masculinized surgically. Height and hip bone geometry can be altered when hormonal intervention is in early puberty. So if you give a person in early puberty the hormones of the opposite sex, they will develop accordingly, even when it comes to their height and the bones in their pelvis, which everybody seems to think for some reason is not affected if you take hormonal treatment. If the hormonal treatment is early enough, it is affected. Now, chromosomal sex, can't touch that. You cannot alter chromosomal sex. Okay, so is biology binary? This is where we get to like the good stuff. Now, a false and common belief is that male and female are opposite categories, and that human bodies are either exclusively male or exclusively female. Okay, this is kind of important. So binary means either or. So that's exclusion. If you're in this category, you're not in that category. So these categories don't have a middle ground, they don't have a neutral zone, and they don't overlap. So a female body would have all its traits be uniquely female, primary and secondary sex characteristics, external and internal anatomy, gonads, hormones, and chromosomes. And the male body would have all this list of things be only male. Now, this isn't usually the case. First of all, intersex is not a rare phenomenon. Okay, so 1.7% of the population is thought to be intersex, and that is probably an underestimation. It is not in itself a pathology to be intersex, and it doesn't need correction. All right, if the individual does not desire it, and there is no immediate risk to their health, intersex bodies are perfectly a natural part of our diversity. Now, some intersex conditions have an elevated risk for some pathologies, and they need treatment for those pathologies. But intersexuality in and of itself is not a pathology and does not require correction. Now, intersex bodies present, by definition, a mix of female and male traits. Secondly, transgender bodies, such as the one I have, that have gone through medical intervention, cannot be accurately described using a binary division. my body, for example, has female, male, and neutral traits. So I have male muscle, I hope, fat and hair distribution, and I have a male chest because I had chest surgery, and a male voice because I've been on testosterone for 4 years. My height and hip width, hand and feet size is not distinctly male or female. It could be either way. My facial bone structure is female, which nobody seems to notice through my beard. I do have ovaries, but they do not make me menstruate, and they don't pop out an egg anymore once a month, or sperm. So I don't menstruate. I still have my original female plumbing, which I am not super comfortable telling you about. So just suffice to say that it actually works quite differently than before, physically speaking, because of testosterone. So what about non-intersex cisgender normal individuals? So I'm talking about normal in the numerical sense, not in the ethical sense. Like this, just the norm, the statistical norm that most people are like this, not intersex and not transgender. So it's crucial to understand that anatomical sex traits are mostly spectrums, not black and white binaries. The easy examples that we all understand are muscle mass, fat distribution, height, voice pitch, hair patterns, and so on. But okay, breasts, penises, clitorises, scrotums, labia, and gonads are also spectrums. All of these vary in shape and size and morphology, even in typically male and typically female people. Even chromosomes have variations. So not just XX and XY. Chromosomes also have a single X, and XXY, and mosaic chromosomes, which means that some of the cells in the body are XY and some of the cells are XX. Now, nature doesn't draw a line between male, female, and intersex. Humans' definitions do, and they do so inconsistently. So different doctors will have different opinions on what it means to be male, female, or intersex along the spectrum. Now, for most traits, male and female are statistical ranges with some overlap and not mutually exclusive opposites. Now, a single trait, such as the width of your hip bone, right? So how big is your pelvis, can fall in the extreme female range. So extremely rare or non-existent in males, very wide hips. The mid-female range, so considerably less common in males, so wide hips. Most males don't have them. The female to neutral borderline, so slightly less common in males, and that would be just somewhat wide hips. The neutral range, which would be hips that cannot accurately be described as wide, which would be as common as males as it is in females. Now, the neutral to male borderline, slightly less common in females, so a somewhat narrow hip. The mid-male range, so narrow hips, considerably less common in females, or the extreme male range, so extremely rare or non-existent in females, would be just the narrowest hips you can imagine. So what does it even mean to be binary male or binary female? So there's a lot of physical sex characteristics. There's really a very long list. Each of it has a spectrum with a dispersion pattern on that spectrum. Most of them would be normal because that's what it means to have a normal dispersion. To be exclusively female, for example, you would need to have all of those long lists of traits, every single one of them, be in the extreme female range. Now, statistically, that's possible, but it's very, very rare. Now, think about your friends. How many of them don't have a single physical trait that a single male person could have? Okay, so do you have a female friend that has a body that nothing about her body could remotely even ever be presented by a male individual? You might have a friend like that. It's very rare. And then think, how many people do you know that have a somewhat androgynous appearance? Not everything, just one or two things. So it's not that common to have a body that has all of its characteristics in the extreme masculine or all of its characteristics in the extreme feminine. And this would be a binary body, okay? Just statistically speaking, what is actually common is to have a body where most of the traits fall within the male or the female range. And some traits fall within the neutral or shared range, and one or two might even fall within the opposite range, all right? So therefore, I argue that a binary division of biological sex isn't a good representation, even for most cisgender, non-intersex people. Or in other words, binary biological sex isn't a good description for most people, because most people would have some characteristics about the sex aspects of their body that are not in the extreme of the range for their sex, like a man with very thick hair, like a woman with a heavy set jaw. Okay, now these are not rare things. Almost everyone will have something that is not markedly female or male, even though they are female or male. Let's talk about this a little bit. So, primary sex characteristics, which are anatomies, might be lost due to injury or illness. Gonadal sex, so that's the tissue in your ovaries or your testicles, might become indeterminable due to injury or illness or just old age. Like eventually you lose the capacity to make sperm or eggs if you get old enough or if something happens. Now, hormone levels already have a very large range of variation from the get-go. They might be altered due to injury or disease, and they normally change throughout life anyway. So children don't have elevated sex hormones, and after a certain age, neither do adults. Now, most secondary sex characteristics can be altered, and we actually play with them quite a lot. Permanent body hair removal with laser, for example, is very common. Okay. So a cisgender, non-intersex, that is normal, statistically speaking, normal woman, might have PCOS. Now, that's a very common medical condition that affects the ovaries. It's called polycystic ovarian syndrome, but is not considered intersex. She might not menstruate due to the PCOS, right? Because it's part of what this pathology could mean. Now, she might have had her uterus removed due to cancer. She might be tall with large hands due to genetics. So the primary sex characteristics and the gonadal sex are not typically female. So she might have elevated testosterone levels because of the PCOS. So hormonal sex makeup is not typically female. She might be a devoted swimmer carrying a lot of muscle mass in her shoulders. She might have thinner hair with a slightly receded hairline because of genetics, small breasts, like very small breasts, and a neutral voice due to her genetics, basically. She could have like a low speaking voice for a woman. And that would make her secondary sex characteristics not markedly female. She might not remove any of her body hair. And she might be naturally just a little bit hairier. But her chromosomes would be XX. Okay, so cisgender. Non-intersex, that is normal man, might have had testicular cancer or a car accident, right? And had to have his testicles and penis removed because something terrible happened, okay? So now the primary sex characteristics and gonadal sex are not typically male. He might have low testosterone levels because of this, because, for example, they tried to give him HRT, like testosterone, and he had side effects, so he can only have very little testosterone. Now, he might be short and have a head full of like very thick hair and very little facial hair. In some ethnicities, that's a very common combination. With a neutral voice pitch due to his genetics, because he just naturally has like a kind of high speaking voice for a male. He might not be physically active and have very little muscle whatsoever. He might be somewhat overweight, which sometimes goes with low testosterone and not being physically active. And he might also have a propensity to be overweight. And then he might carry some of this weight in his hips. And he might even develop gynecomastia, which is male breasts. Now, he might have had his body hair permanently removed with laser treatment. Some people do that, but his chromosomes would be XY. Now, look at these two individuals. A binary description of their biology as exclusively male or exclusively female is just inaccurate. Now, nobody's arguing that this is a man or a woman. We're not talking about their gender, right? And I'm not saying they are not female or they are not male because they don't have X or Y. I'm saying that a binary representation is inaccurate because the traits themselves are not binary. They're not all in one category or all in the other category. They're like somewhere in the middle, mixed, and some are in the original category. So popular belief is that biological sex cannot be changed, that it is determined by chromosomes. And that is actually just not true. Actually, all aspects of sex, except for chromosomes, can be changed if you start early enough. Now, chromosomes are kind of irrelevant to determining sex in reality because they're only very rarely known and they're not usually used to determine sex, even in medical interactions. Your doctor might have determined your sex as male or female without knowing your chromosomes. And then you go someday and have your chromosome tested, and then it turns out to be different because it doesn't always show. Now, it is common for individuals to have bodies where not all physical traits align to the extreme of one sex category, or even check all the boxes for the category. Now, this can be congenital or acquired, and it's true for everyone. Cisgender, transgender, and intersex, we are more likely to have mixed characteristics than to have uniquely female or uniquely male characteristics. Therefore, I argue that we actually use biological sex as a belief system, not a scientific system. To conclude, I would like to point out some of the inconsistencies in how we use biological sex as binary. So few questions, right? If the presence of external genitalia, so penises versus vaginas, determines sex, then we kind of have a double standard on transgender surgery versus reconstructive surgery in cisgender people. So if a cisgender soldier, like a manly soldier, goes through a horrible accident in the combat and loses his penis, and then he has surgery, you consider that like reconstructive surgery on his penis. But then if a transgender man has phalloplasty, which is the construction of a penis, then some people would regard that as like a fake penis because it's plastic surgery, really. And why do they say that? So some of them would tell you it's because they didn't have the penis at birth. Now, if the presence of external genitalia at birth determines sex, then biological sex is a metaphysical concept, not a physical concept, because it's not talking about the present physical future presence. It's talking about the past, and the relationship between the past and the future is not a measurable trait in the body. It's a philosophical question. Now, either we admit that biological sex is a metaphysical concept if genitalia determines at birth your sex, or we just admit that birth biological sex is one thing, is a separate concept from current biological sex. Let me make this really simple. So I had blue eyes when I was born. Now I have brown eyes. So are my eyes brown or blue? I mean, they're brown now, but they were blue when I was born. So if we go by what you were born with is important more than what you have right now. So why don't we say I have blue eyes? Because I literally don't. Now, if producing eggs or sperm determines sex, like it does in, like, I don't know, microbes, then individuals without it are supposed to be left out of the classification. But in practice, they are not. So my mother doesn't menstruate anymore, but nobody seems to think she's not female anymore because of that. And I kind of tend to agree. Now, if chromosomes determine sex, then most people can't determine their own sex, let alone that of other people, because you can't know. If you haven't had them tested, you don't know. Also, they come in more variations than just XX or XY. And even the doctors can't decide which is which. Okay? So even if chromosomes determine sex, it wouldn't be strictly binary because there's more than just two categories. And even if we used just two categories, we don't know our own and we don't know most of other people's. And if anyone ever knows their own, they don't go around telling it to anybody. So you shouldn't be able to determine sex on sight point blank. But in fact, we determine sex on sight point blank. So what do we actually rely on, right? Like, we look at a person and then by what they look like, we kind of say that's a female, that's a male, or what the hell is that? I better ask, right? So we mostly go by secondary sex characteristics when we're talking about adults. That would be like, how muscly are they? Do they have a beard? Do they have a low voice? Are they bald? Right? So secondary sex characteristics, all these stuff determine sex, then children shouldn't be assigned a sex because they don't have them yet. They literally just don't have them yet. The differences between children's bodies are like genitalia and chromosomes. And I really hope, really hope you do not always determine children's sex by checking out their genitalia. I mean, think about it. When you need to know a child's sex and you can't tell by looking, because sometimes, boys and girls just wear the same shit, just shorts and a t-shirt. What do? You ask their parents, or you look at their clothes, or you listen to how they talk, right? Like a 9-year-old or a 7-year-old. You look at how short the haircut is, and do they have a pink shirt or a blue shirt, right? And actually, you're not looking at the physical traits that you would in an adult. So you determine sex differently for children than you do for adults, either by social or social things like how they are conceived or how they talk about themselves, their manners, right? or by somebody else's opinion, like their parents' opinion, right? Like their parents tell you, my child is this or that. And they tell you that based on what the doctor was looking at their genitals. So there you are again with children's genitals. I mean, let's just leave children's genitals alone, you know? Okay. It's definitely not what you do with adults, though. Okay, so if sex is determined by the overall sum of all of these characteristics, how do we justify giving more importance to some of them, like chromosomes, than others, such as everything else? How is it medically adequate to screen for cancer using a classification system where an individual can have all the traits for group A, but still be classified as group B based on a single invisible trait that nobody has tested that is assumed to be normal when there's a 1.7 chance that it isn't, based on what his body looked like at birth to a doctor? Imagine we're talking about breast cancer. Wouldn't it make more sense to screen for breast cancer in people with breasts? Just saying. Wouldn't it make more sense to screen for prostate cancer for people with prostates? Like, I don't have a prostate. Why should I get cancer screening for a prostate I don't have? Now, if biological sex is not determined by the overall sum of all of these characteristics, yet separately, they cannot determine sex or are unknown for individual cases, why are they included in the concept? Like, is biological sex supposed to be just a description of how bodies are? Or is it a description of how bodies should be? Because if it's a description of how bodies are, then it's not accurate. Why is it assumed to be unchangeable when reality, in fact, changes quite a lot? Now, why is it assumed to be binary when reality, in fact, is a little bit non-binary in most cases? Now, if it is prescriptive, how a sexed body should be, then why don't we all know our chromosomes? And why don't we, quote unquote, correct bodies according to chromosomes? Maybe because it isn't important, and maybe because biological sex isn't prescriptive. So biological sex is a scientific concept, yes, but we use it socially in like very weird ways. Now, bodies are not usually binary, but for some reason, we pretend that they always are. It's just not a useful classification system for transgender and intersex people, and it's just not an accurate one for most people. So the binary division into male and female is accompanied by the false expectation that bodies normally have all its traits be exclusively male or exclusively female. This is an oversimplification that is neither helpful nor generally true, as it is statistically normal for a single body to present with traits that fall in different places on the female neutral male spectrum. In reality, sex biology can be much more accurately described as non-binary, with two large diffuse clusters that partially overlap in a neutral zone. And that's all I have to say. So thank you so much. I will be taking questions. If this goes up to YouTube, then the questions can go on the comments. And if this is live, then just go ahead and ask me now. Thank you very much. Also, I want to credit a very good content creator called Riley J. Dennis, whose original video on this subject really gave me most of the content that I'm using today. Like, the basis for this was her putting up like a video about how trans women are not biologically male. So I really want to thank you, Riley J. Dennis, for doing all of this amazing work and pulling all that stuff together. And I heavily relied on a biology book by Joanne Roughgarden called Evolution's Rainbow, a biologist and evolutionary biologist, I think, who wrote a very, very, very good book about sexual diversity in animals and humans. And I think it's a must read for anybody who's even slightly interested in the field. And thank you so much. And thank you to Valen, of course, for the amazing photos that accompany this lecture.